So the first thing we said is you need to have some, I hesitate to use the word substantial, but some amount of agricultural use to say, yeah, there is what we would think of as a primary agricultural use. ALAB in their deliberations in 2007 said, we think that maybe the county's subdivision standards based on ag use would make sense, and they voted and initially passed that. That is, in general, 40 acres of an irrigated crop, 160 acres of a dry farm crop, or 320 acres of rangeland. So that's a primary ag use. That's really a clear, bright line. We came back as the ag department and said, we think that you might be excluding too many potential agriculturalists that are of a smaller scale that could benefit from visitor uses, that would still be accessory, would be incidental to their primary ag use. And through further deliberations, we came up with what's in your staff report, of a variety of acreages ranging from as little as 2 acres of an intensive nursery operation to 100 acres of grazing land, sort of anywhere in that range. And so that was the primary ag use component. Then we also said, and it doesn't make sense if you have 100 acres of rangeland that you would have 100 acres of accessory use area, which has been sort of you need to be, for wineries, just under, your visitor use needs to be 49% of your primary processing area.
A maximum of 49%.
A maximum.
Yeah, so less than half.
Yeah, less than half has been the practice, or the evolved practice of looking at wineries and visitor uses. We said that doesn't make sense when we're not looking at these intensive structural ag processing facilities. We said, and ALAP agreed, 5% made more sense, and that there would be this maximum footprint. And I'd say we were quite generous in saying a maximum of 5 acres of footprint could be devoted to this accessory use area. There is, if you look into the details, some caveats for small sites, so sites that would have very intensive crop uses that could have 10% of that area devoted to a visitor use, but by and large 5%. And so that was the framework that was created. The planning department spoke about that. Initially, through our ag tourism discussions, it was discussed that this would be applicable for ag events, which is this not yet created category of events. But as a department and in ALAB, we discussed this much more broadly as this concept that would apply to visitor uses on ag lands, that this would be the schematic or the framework we would use to evaluate all visitor uses, that events weren't different than lodging uses or camping uses or a dude ranch or sales uses. We would use the same process. So the deliberations at ALAP were more broad in that this wasn't about ag events specifically. It was about visitor uses and about determining a primary ag use and an incidental or a secondary visitor use area.
And excuse me, Mr. Eisensee, sorry to butt in.
Sure.
But was that a consensus reached among ALAB and a general group, or was there some dissension?
I believe the vote was consensus, but as I said, there was an initial vote that I think was consensus or very near consensus going the other direction, using a larger primary ag use. But I believe that there was general consensus. There is certainly a diversity of viewpoints on ALAB, and there are members that don't believe visitor uses belong on ag land, and there are members that believe there should be very little limits. But
okay, so the definite consensus was that there should be a more strict interpretation of
I wouldn't say there was a consensus that way either. There's a diversity of viewpoints, but they thought as an approach to implementing Ag Policy 6, as it exists in the county's policies, that this was an appropriate method to move forward. I'd have to look back to see if it was actually a consensus vote or not.
Was there any discussion at ALAB as to the question of whether or not Ag Policy 6 should be applied to these events?
No.
Or was it just their assumption was that Ag Policy 6 would apply?
It's been assumed that it would apply.
Okay.
And it's certainly at the decision maker's discretion as to whether events are visitor uses or not.
But you didn't A-Lab didn't discuss that question
No.
specifically because everyone in the room was operating under the assumption that AGP 6 applies to visitor serving uses.
Right, and since 2005, since the board authorization to further implement Ag Policy 6, events has been part of that discussion as one of the kinds of visitor uses that might occur on ag lands.
Okay, and we got you sort of off track, so apologize for you missing your stride.
I think there are a number of questions that we don't have specific answers to. I can explain how we've done it and explained, I guess, in the rubric of wineries how we do it in terms of looking at square footage area. There's differences of opinion whether existing structures should be looked at as being part of that footprint or not, whether required access roads or expansions of access roads should be part of the visitor use area. And there's certainly a number of, there's some gray areas there. In many cases, we're aware of that. We've tried with wineries to do the best we can. As an example, we know a winery needs a primary access road for the winery, regardless of any visitor use. So we count that road as part of the winery use area. But a winery that has special events needs a secondary access road. We count that as part of the visitor use area. Though I know, thinking back a few months to a project before you, there was discussion and we agreed that we would only count the expansion of that road, that there was an existing ag-exempt road that needed to be expanded, and so we only accounted the difference between the 16 to the 20 feet as part of the visitor use. Those aren't clear things. We're open to further direction from you and the Board of Supervisors, whether roads should be included, whether parking areas should be included. With events, we know that if there's an event that occurs once a year, it's very possible on many ag sites that those areas can have ag uses for parts of the year, that they might be a crush pad, they might be a field that's fallowed part of the year that's growing a crop that's only a 100-day crop, and then there's an event and you park in that field. But at some point, if you're having an event every month, you're not using that for ag uses in general. You're having to maintain it for your visitor use. So endless gray areas in those regards. The conversion of structures, we think converting old barns is maybe a very good use of old barns, but we think of that area as being now a visitor use. It's not a ag-exempt barn anymore. So those are points to discuss and hear from the public about. Are there any questions at this point?
Just since you last mentioned old barns, and I'm also interested in old barns, and it comes up over and over again, and we've all seen possibilities for sort of misuse of kind of existing structures that were built unpermitted for ag use and then transitioning into some kind of visitor serving use. Could you talk about, do you have any sense in the draft of the temporary event ordinance, staff's version wrote in some kind of cutoff date for existing structures? I think year 2000 or thereabouts was in there, kind of structures built after that date couldn't be used. Give just some way in, because we see a likelihood of kind of misuse if we're too liberal on this allowance.
Certainly. I think what Commissioner Wyatt's talking about, when we were working on the proposed revisions, this is viewed as a loophole that I think staff has quite a bit of experience with, especially with regard to people building an ag-exempt structure with the potential ultimate use of something other than it being an ag structure. It's not uncommon to see a structure built and within 1 to 3 years a permit come in for a new use for that structure. And I think staff, and as we were working on the new ordinance, thought that this was something that should be avoided, because it's a mechanism for people, in essence, to avoid environmental review on siting that structure appropriately. And so we see that as a way that people avoid meeting their required setbacks or placing a structure in maybe not the most appropriate site, or at least without review. It may be the most appropriate site, but there's no review associated with it.